Chapter 1. In the early days, the wall of thorns had been distressingly obvious. There was simply no way to hide a hedge with thorns like sword blades and stems as thick as a man's eye. A wall like that invited curiosity, and with curiosity came axes. And it was all the fairy could do to keep some of those curious folk from gaining entrance to the tower. Eventually, though, the brambles had grown up around the edges. Blackberry and briar and dog rose, all the weedy opportunists, and that softened the edge of the thorn wall and gave the fairy some breathing room. Roving princes and penniless younger sons had been fascinated by the thorns, which were so obviously there to keep people out. Hardly anybody was interested in a bramble thicket. It helped, too, that the land around the thorns became inhospitable. It was nothing so obvious as a desert, but wells ran dry practically as soon as they had been dug, and rain passed through the soil as if it were sand instead of loam. That was the fairy's doing too, though she regretted the necessity. The fairy was the greenish-tan color of mushroom stems, and her skin bruised blue-black, like mushroom flesh. She had a broad, frog-like face and waterweed hair. She was neither beautiful nor made of malice, as many of the fair folk are said to be. Mostly she was fretful and often tired. "How do they know?" she asked miserably. "Everyone who knew her should be dead of old age by now. Them and their children, too. Their grandchildren should be gray-haired. How do they even remember there's a tower here?" She was talking, more or less, to a white wagtail, a little bird that liked short grass and pumped its tail constantly as it walked. Wagtails were not so clever as rooks or jackdaws or carrion crows, but the fairy liked them. They did not make fun of her like the crows would, nor carry tales the way that the rooks did. The wagtail scurried closer, pumping its tail up and down. "They must be telling stories," said the fairy hopelessly, "about a princess in a tower and a hedge of thorns to keep the princes out." She wiped her eyes. She knew that her eyelids were turning blue-black in response to the unshed tears. There was no one to see her except the wagtail, but she pinched the bridge of her nose and tilted her head back anyway. The old habits were still with her. "I can't fight stories," she whispered, and a few tears, dark as ink, ran down her face and tangled in her hair. The time did pass, and perhaps the stories were told less often. Fewer men came to the Thornhedge with axes. The wagtails left because they preferred open country, and the fairy was sorry to see them go. Jays moved in, flitting through the thorns and blistering the air with their scolds. They were shy and spooked easily, for all their cursing. The fairy recognized kindred spirits, as she still spooked easily herself. As the years trickled away and the thorns filled with dog roses, her soul grew easier. There were stones inside her heart that would never stop grinding together, but they did not weigh so heavily in the years when no princes came. The fairy was filled with dread when she heard the ringing of nearby axes. She crouched in the brambles, toad-shaped, motionless, thinking, "What will I do if they come nearer?" But they did not come nearer. They cut a road through the woods but gave the brambles a wide swath. The tower had been built on a rocky hill, a good, defensible place for a castle, but not a good place for a road. The axe-bearers cut south instead, in a long curve, over what had once been fields held by the plow. The fairy was afraid for a long time that the coming of the road would mean the coming of more princes and younger sons, but mostly what it brought were merchants and travelers. None seemed interested in forcing their way through a massive bramble thicket, and perhaps none of them made the connection about how much land the brambles covered, or stopped to wonder what such a dense growth might conceal. She watched the travelers with interest, for those were the only human faces, save one, that she saw. They were so very different, in so many different shapes and colors. Pale, fair-haired men striding down from the north, and dark-skinned men in beautiful armor riding in on horses from the east. Men in caravans who looked like the old royal family, serfs and peasants in homespun, the traveling folk in their wagons. A great cross-section of humanity who would pass one another on the road and nod and sometimes stop and speak in unfamiliar languages. One of the few kind gifts given to and by the fair folk is the ability to speak any of the languages of the earth. The fairy could understand what they were saying, but while the words were familiar, the rest was not. She did not recognize the names of the cities they spoke of, nor the kings, nor caliphs, and the details of taxation and trade law were beyond her. The tide of people grew and grew, and a trade house went up a few miles away. The fairy could see the smoke of it in the sky. She knotted her fingers together and huddled under the thorn hedge to escape the gnawing fear. "Let them not come," she prayed. She had been told that the fair folk were without souls, and probably that applied to her as well, a befuddled creature betwixt and between. Still, just in case, she prayed. Let them not come here. Let them not clear the thorns. I do not know how many of them I can hold off. Please keep them away. Amen. She added the last worriedly, not sure if that made it a prayer, or if she was supposed to be doing something else. The royal family's priest had been reasonably accepting of her presence, but that tolerance had not extended to teaching her how to make a prayer correctly. Perhaps something heard her prayer. The flow of people slowed to a trickle. The merchants stopped coming. The fairy saw only a few people. There were men in great bird-like masks and dark, tightly fitted clothes that gleamed with wax. They strode by like herons, like birds of prey, and the fairy cowered away from them. There was something about the masks that were too much like the faces of the elder fair folk. Even so, she preferred the birdmen to the screamers. They traveled in groups, half-naked, shrieking like animals. Sometimes they struck themselves with ropes of thorns, howling as the blood flowed, then cackling with laughter. They stank of madness. One ran a little way into the brambles, tearing his skin on the thorns, and then staggered out again. The fairy, toad-shaped, waited until the rains had come and gone before she came near those brambles again. Whatever madness had infected the screamers, she would not risk contact with it. After a time, there were neither birdmen nor screamers. There was no one at all. The road filled with weeds. The fairy, who had been afraid of humans, now began to miss them. Not the screamers or the birdmen, but the others who had come before. They had been company of a sort, even if they did not know she was there. She slept more and more. The jays stole shiny things from each other's nests, but found no new ones. The seasons chased one another, and a day came when she heard hoofbeats. Men coming from the east, on their fine-boned horses, riding down the ruined road. They wore no armor. There were 2 birdmen in their midst, also on horses, and they were riding hard as if afraid. After that, the floodgates opened. Men and women came streaming from the east and then back from the west, on horses and on foot, in wagons and caravans. Sometimes they rode with knights carrying banners with red crosses on them. When they spoke to each other, she heard words like plague and graves, and so many dead. The fairy curled into a ball and wept for the dead, and yet a tiny, nagging voice said, "Perhaps the story of the tower will die with them." It was a terrible thing to be glad that whole cities had died. It must be true, thought the fairy bleakly. I must not have a soul, to be relieved even a little. And she cried even more, until the ground was black with tears. The weeds were trampled down again, in time, and the traffic became more normal. The style of clothing changed and changed again, and the traveling folk came again in their wagons, and still no one ventured into the brambles for a long, long time. It was many years later that a knight came up to the edge of the hedge and stood there, gazing inward. The fairy was broadly aware when people came too near the hedge, with a sensation like a mosquito on her skin. This one stung, and she crept toward it, first toad-shaped, then woman-shaped, seeking the source. She found a campfire, and the knight camped beside it. It was not yet full dark, and he stood with his back to the flame, looking at the brambles. The fairy did not like that look. It had too much behind it. He was actually looking at the thornhedge and thinking about it, and that might lead to questions about what was on the other side. Go away, she thought. Go away. Quit looking. They can't be telling stories. Not now. It's been so long. Eventually, he turned back to the fire. The fairy crept closer. By the make of his equipment, he was a Saracen? Was that the word? She could not quite remember, but she recognized a knight well enough. Whatever his faith, he was not terribly tall, and his armor was clean but well worn. His horse had good bones, but the tack was nearly scraped through with cleanliness. The curved sword by his side had empty sockets instead of gems. It all spoke of genteel poverty, a state that she had come to associate with younger sons of nobility. The firelight fell kindly but did nothing to dispel the shadows under his eyes, and a well-trimmed beard could not quite hide the hollowness of his cheekbones. Even so, he was probably vastly wealthy compared to her. Toads had little use for coin, which was just as well, because she didn't have any. Even in the days when she had lived within the keep with other people, no one would have thought to pay a fairy. On the other hand, she could eat worms and beetles and sleep under a stone, which humans could not, so perhaps it balanced out. He'll leave tomorrow morning, she told herself. He's searching for a place to camp that won't cost any money. That's all. She wrapped her arms around herself. That's all. His head lifted, and for a moment he was gazing directly at her hiding place. Her first instinct was to go to toad shape, but that would have meant another motion, even a small one, as she dropped to the earth. Instead, she stayed absolutely still, unmoving, not even drawing breath. The fire crackled. He looked away. She exhaled, very slowly, through her mouth. When his back is turned, toad shape, she told herself. And then away. I don't need to see any more. He'll be gone in the morning. Eventually, he turned to care for his horse, and she dropped to the leaves. The hard, warty toad skin enveloped her, and she hopped slowly away. He was not gone in the morning. She was up at dawn, fretting, waiting for him to move on, and he had the unmitigated gall to sleep in. You're a knight, she grumbled. Aren't you supposed to be off jousting or toppling citadels for some noble purpose or something? Apparently, he was getting a late start on the citadel. The morning was half over before he rose, and it was nearly noon before he had finished mending a stray bit of bridle and finally saddled his horse. And then he didn't get on it. He took it by the reins and walked. She trailed at a distance, waiting for him to head to the road. He didn't. He walked along the edge of the brambles, always looking inward, skirting the areas where the briars grew thickly in the hollows. On one particular rise, where the hedge of brambles was thin, he stopped. He dropped his horse's reins over its head, ground-tying it, and then prowled in front of the hedge, looking. The fairy could have screamed. She took shelter under a fallen log farther down the slope and watched him watching the wall. What's he searching for? Is he trying to find a way in? She found herself gazing past him at the thorn wall, trying to imagine what he was seeing. Surely there was nothing there to hint at the tower inside. The roof had been pulled off by the briars long ago, and what remained was cloaked in trees. It looked like a tall thicket on a hillside, surrounded by a bramble patch. If you looked in exactly the right place, you might see a few lines a little too straight to be a tree trunk, but you had to know exactly where to look. He can't see that. I can barely see it, and I remember when the tower was new. Oh, why won't he go away? He did not go away. He led his horse onward, making a slow circuit of the Thornhedge. The fairy followed. By the time evening came, he had returned to his original campsite. He set his horse to graze and built up the fire again. If he doesn't leave on his own, she thought, I will have to drive him off. Spook his horse, tie elf knots in his hair, something. He turned and glanced up at the sky, orange light painting the side of his face. He did not look like a man who would be easily driven away by elf knots. I could turn into a toad at him. She raked her hands through her hair. She had so few powers, and the ones she had were mostly tied up inside what was left of the tower. Now well, she could call up fish. Fish would probably not help the situation. She could try to talk a kelpie into helping her, but they were wild, and anyway, she would have to go somewhere that had kelpies, and that would involve leaving the keep unguarded. I will start with elf knots, she told herself firmly. Lots and lots of them. It will take him a week to comb his hair. When he had banked the fire and settled down, when his breathing had become slow and even, she slunk into the open. She would have felt safer in toad shape, but elf knots required fingers. The campsite was full of deep blue shadows, a true fairy. One of the fair folk, by birth and blood, could have folded themselves into the smallest of those shadows and become as invisible as a spiderweb. She was not so gifted. She could only go quietly, setting her bare feet where there were no twigs or leaves to give her away. The knight did not move. His hands were curled neatly beside his head. She crouched over him, the least likely of predators, and listened to his breathing. When several minutes had passed without movement, she gave a soundless sigh and her shoulders slumped with relief. He had thick, curly hair, the perfect sort of thing for elf knots. The fairy stretched out her fingers and touched a single strand. It flexed and shivered, slowly teasing away from its companions. She frowned with concentration. Like an impossibly slender serpent, the hair began to move on its own. It tangled around the lock of hair closest to it, doubled back on itself, tangled again. She flicked her fingers again, and a second hair joined the first, then a third. They snaked in and out, drawing others with them. Half knot, half braid. The resulting knot grew larger, binding together dozens of individual hairs, then hundreds. When a section of his hair as thick as her thumb was a solid mat, she sat back on her heels and let out her breath. It's been so long, but I always was good at elf knots. His hand closed gently over her wrist. Are you quite done? Asked the knight. Chapter 2. The fairy stared down at the hand on her wrist, and her thought was not that she was caught, but that someone was touching her. It had been many years since a living being had touched her. She could not remember how many years. She had almost forgotten that such things were possible, and yet there it was, the solid weight of a palm and 4 fingers pressed against the underside of her wrist. I was going to ask if you were one of the jinn, said the knight slowly, sitting up, but they are made of fire, and there is no fire in you. She shook her head, still staring at his hand. Her skin looked green and sickly in the moonlight next to his. Are you an elf then? It seemed important not to lie. She licked her lips and said, something like an elf. Yes, I see. She had spoken to him, and he had spoken back. That also had not happened for many years. He released her wrist. She looked up, startled. He made a little half bow, more of a nod, still seated. You have been following me, he said. I thought you were something more malign. I did not mean to frighten you. His face was serious and polite. The mat dangling by his left ear looked ridiculous. He was talking to her. I was. The fairy had to stop, as the absurdity of speaking to a person and having them speak back nearly overwhelmed her. If she thought about it for too long, she would start laughing or crying or both. I wasn't frightened. It occurred to her that she could run away. He was sitting and she was crouched, and she had a good chance of making it to the trees. Once she was in toad shape, she could hide in the leaves. I should go. I will go. She did not move. Why were you following me? He asked. She thought about this. She did not dare tell him all the truth. This is my place, she said finally. You are in it. I apologize for my trespass, madam. He moved then, holding up his hands, away from her. I am going to build up the fire, he said. Please stay. No one had asked her to do anything since before the tower fell. She took a half-hearted step toward the woods, then stopped. The skin on her wrist rang like an echo. He laid a log on the fire and stirred it until it crackled. Then he sat down and looked across it at her. Does the fire trouble you? He asked. Can you sit beside it? Troubled by the fire? What manner of creature does he think I am? Still, perhaps it was not that strange a question. She never lit fires herself. When it was cold or damp, it was easier to take toad shape. Toads were not particularly bothered by damp, and they sank into a peaceful torpor in winter, beneath the leaves. She came a little closer, keeping the fire between them. He had asked her to stay, and so she would for a little while, but if he made any move to catch her, she would run. The silence grew awkward. She lifted her hands to her temples. Forgive me, she said. I have not had to talk to anyone. It has been a long time. She grimaced. Are you a... She tried to find the right word from among the half-dozen her gift offered. Saracen? His eyebrows shot up. He looked briefly offended, and his face smoothed. It has been a very long time, I expect, he said. That word is not used much anymore. I've said something wrong. That didn't take long. She flushed. I'm sorry. He shook his head. It is all right. How long have you been here? Wanting to hurry past the moment, she was more honest than she meant to be. I don't know. Years. I kept meaning to count the winters, but I would sleep, and then I couldn't remember how many I had forgotten. She made a vague gesture with one hand, toward the road. Before people built that. His eyebrows went up again. There were a lot of people, she said. She could not seem to stop talking, now that she had started. There was some enormous store of words bottled up inside her, it seemed. Then very strange people, then no one, then more people again who looked like you, talking about the plague. The knight rubbed a hand over his face. You have been here since before the death, he said. God have mercy. That seemed a very strange thing to say, but the fairy did not want to risk being wrong again. She clasped her hands together and asked, very carefully, what do you mean by the death? A great plague, he said. Justinian's third plague. It killed half the world, they say, perhaps a little less. In the Holy Land, though, they found a cure, and they brought it north to heal those who were left. But so many had died, and all the fields were lying fallow. He held his hands out, palm up. There are songs about it now. My people came from Anatolia in the east, fleeing a great famine, and they came here and found all this land and hardly anyone left to work it. Of course, nobody wanted their land taken by outsiders, but they also didn't want it going to weeds and wilderness, and the lords that survived were handing out property left and right, because they'd lost so many serfs, you see. And then the Seljuks were fighting Byzantium, and whoever won, they were likely to come calling here next, so there was a land act, I think, maybe 2, and a few minor squabbles over who was in charge of what was left, and then I think the Danes got involved somehow. I'm sorry, I can't remember all of it, or the order it goes in. I might have part of it backward. I like books, but I can't memorize dates the way some people can. She nodded. It all seemed very strange. Half the world dead? Was that possible? She stared at the fire, thinking of how many people that must be, all of them real, and how she would never be able to hold them all in her head or mourn for each of them. She hoped that there had been someone to mourn properly for them. She did not think she could take on another task and hope to see it done. Do elves tell their names to mortals? Asked the knight. The great fair folk did not, but since the fairy had no true name for someone to use against her, it hardly mattered. Toadling, she said. He frowned at her. It does not seem kind to call you that. It was her turn to frown. Had she said something wrong again? No, she had been toadling for her whole life. The green teeth had given her the name when she was barely born. Toadling, she said firmly. It is what I am called. And I am Helene, he said. And I apologize for trespassing in your forest. Toadling considered this. It is all right, she said, so long as you leave again. She felt an odd hitch in her chest as she said it. It had been so long since she had spoken to another person, and she had not come even close to using all the words that she had stored up. She did not want him to leave. She did not want him to stay. She put her hands up to her face. Helene frowned. I do not wish to offend you, he said, but I cannot leave just yet. There is something here that I wish to see. Toadling looked up at his face, startled. There is nothing here, she said. Her voice was high and it sounded angry, and Toadling, who had always hated any kind of conflict, wanted to recoil from it immediately. Nothing. There is at least one thing here, said Helene, smiling faintly. A fairy girl that I am looking at right now. That is something. Toadling shook her head angrily. Nothing important, she said. You should leave. There is nothing here. If there is nothing here, then why does it matter if I leave? He asked. She inhaled sharply, and he held up both hands. I am sorry, he said. That was unkind. You have asked me to leave, and it is hardly the act of a good knight or a good Muslim to stay against a lady's wishes. A lady. Toadling wanted to laugh, but if she started, she would never stop, and it would turn to crying almost immediately, she was sure, and everything was already terrible, and that would only make it worse. There is a story, Helene said, watching her closely, of a beautiful maiden in a tower enchanted by some terrible magic. There cannot be a story, said Toadling, almost inaudibly. Everyone has been dead for so long. There cannot be a story. Who told you such a story? She took a deep breath, aware that she had not denied it strongly enough. There is no tower, she said, and no maiden. I tell you, there is nothing here. Then why are you here? Asked Helene. She was silent too long, she knew, before she said, I live here. Are you the enchanted maiden? Asked Helene. Toadling stared at him, and this time she did begin to laugh. She tried to choke it off, but she had been right. She kept laughing, and it was a horrible barking laugh like a toad croaking, and then there were black tears on her cheeks. She heard Helene move, and could not bear to look at his face. It would be horror or pity, and she wanted neither. She dropped into toad shape, not caring how it looked, and heard him swear. At least the change had stopped her laughing. Toads are capable of sarcasm, but their blood runs too cold for hysteria. She scrambled into the leaf litter and away. He was still there in the morning. Toadling lurked under a log near his campsite, waiting for him to do something. She had relived their conversation in her head 100 times over the course of the night, and come to the conclusion that she had been foolish. She should have laughed when he said there were stories, laughed and then stopped laughing. If she could not laugh, she should have been grave and serious, and told him that he had been misled. I should have done anything other than what I did. I am a fool, and more than a fool. What remained to be seen was whether he would leave on his own, or whether more words would be required to fix the mess that she had made by speaking in the first place. She hoped not. It has been too long. I have forgotten how to make words do what I wish. He did not leave. Instead, he carefully dressed, boiled tea, and then rose to his feet. He walked to the edge of the woods and cleared his throat. Mistress Toadling, I wish to apologize. I spoke poorly to you last night, and I regret it. He was facing away from her, and clearly had no idea where she was. Toadling lifted a back leg and scratched the side of her head. I particularly should not have cursed. I am sorry. It was unworthy of me. I know that my presence here is unwelcome, and my wish is not to impose. He turned partway, running a hand through his hair. She noted that he had cut out the mass of elf knots. Please, Mistress Toadling, you owe me nothing, but I would be grateful if you would speak to me again. In profile, his face was almost handsome and very grave. He stood for a moment with his lips pressed together, resolute, and then ruined the effect completely by sighing and muttering, Damn it. I don't even know if she's listening. Toadling surprised herself by standing up, shedding her toad skin, and saying, I'm listening. Helene jumped but composed himself quickly. She'd give him that. Mistress Toadling. He inclined his head politely, though even that was more courtesy than Toadling was used to. She rubbed the back of her neck. I am sorry, he said again. I have handled this very badly from first to last. I began by laying hands on you, and then by arguing with you. I am not the best of knights. Toadling shrugged. Will you leave? She asked. Helene frowned. I am not sure I should, he said. This was not the answer that she was expecting. She clasped her hands together. You should, she said. You most certainly should. There is no reason for you to stay. Helene sat down beside the fire. After a moment, Toadling crouched on her heels on the other side. I have come because of a story, he said. You were right that everyone who might have told it is dead. I read it in a book, several books. Toadling felt her stomach drop. Books. Books were terribly expensive. Surely no one would have thought that her father's kingdom was important enough to write down in a book. She clutched her temples. Where did you read such a book? She asked. Who would have written it down? I cannot believe. She was supposed to be saying that there was no tower. She was failing at this again. He had surprised her, and she did not think fast enough. She had been a toad too long. Her blood was sluggish with it. It was an old book, he admitted, where I found it first. It named a kingdom that I had never heard of, and I was half mad with boredom and looking for something to do. He smiled faintly. There is not a great deal of use for younger sons of poor noble families, you know. My mother thought I might become an Hallam, but I had no inclination at all, and so I was an overeducated young knight who could barely afford his own arms and armor. I did not know that, Toadling tried to think of a word that was not Saracen. That, Mussulman, became knights. Muslim, said Halim, and not a terribly devout one if you must know. My mother was devout enough for the whole family, so we left her to it. He poked at the fire. It has been over 200 years since the plague, mistress. I suspect you would find the world very different now. 200 years. It was immense, unthinkable, and ultimately meant nothing at all. 2 years or 200 or 2000, the magic endures. Toadling sighed. It does not matter, she said. I will not be going out in it, so long as it leaves my little wood alone. It was Halim's turn to sigh. The world rarely leaves anyone alone, he said. He poked at the fire again. Well, in answer to your question, you will find that there are Muslims and Christians and people who have gone back to the old gods, and an order of knights for each of them. Being a knight isn't about being religious, so much as it is to figure out what to do with your extra sons so they don't tear up the family seat. Every now and then, someone gets the idea we should start chopping each other's heads off, but in practice, the Pope squats in Rome like a spider, and the caliphs glare at one another over their walls, and the rest of us get along as best we can with each other. He smiled faintly. I found the references to the tower and the princess in the library of a Benedictine monastery, in fact. The brother librarian was a good man, and glad of someone to talk to. Toadling shook her head, dismayed. That the world had changed did not surprise her, but that somewhere a monastery had a book with the story of the tower in it. It was not true, she said, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. There was a stone keep here, Halim said. 500 or 600 years ago at least. I found it in the old land records. And I have ridden over the country for 40 leagues in every direction, and the only place that it could have been is there. He pointed into the woods, directly at the hidden tower. Toadling tried not to flinch. Now, he said, when it became obvious that she was not going to say any more, it is possible that the story was false, and there was never a maiden in the tower and never a wall of thorns. It is a good story, and perhaps whoever wrote it down simply put the name of an old castle to it, to make it seem more realistic. Toadling twined her fingers together. She felt like he was setting a trap, and anything she said was going to set it off. My brothers would say that I am being very foolish, wasting my time on stories, said Halim. They would tell me to work on my swordplay instead, so that I can finally win a tourney. But I do not particularly enjoy tourneys, and I do like stories. And I would still like to get into that old keep, if God wills it, and see if there is a tower. Perhaps there is no maiden sleeping in it after all, but there is a great deal of magic in the world, and I will not dismiss the possibility. There is no maiden, said Toadling. Your brothers were right. Halim put his chin in his hand. Perhaps you are the enchanter, he said. Toadling went very still. Or if you aren't the enchanter, you might be enchanted yourself. Should I be trying to break the curse on you? Toadling blinked at him, aware that she was goggling like a startled frog. What? Is there a curse on you? He asked, leaning forward. Oh my, is that it? No, the conversation was moving too fast for her again. I'm not cursed, which is exactly what you'd say if you were, he pointed out. But it's exactly what I'd say if I wasn't. Well, that's true. He considered. Suppose that I go inside the keep and look around. If you're cursed, maybe I'll figure out how to break it. And if not, then I'll leave you in peace. I'd rather you just left, she said. You won't find anything inside. He pounced on that. So there is a keep then. Toadling opened her mouth, closed it, then let out a single furious sob. His grin of triumph died instantly. He made a move toward her, then stopped himself. Mistress Toadling, gah. I did not mean to cause you pain. I talk too much. I'm sorry. Apologies made it worse. She had long experience with unkindness, but apologies undid her. Her eyes prickled and she dashed blue-black tears away. Her face would look as if she had been beaten again. Damn, go away, she said miserably. Go away, go away. You're only going to make a mess of things. She put her face in her hands. A moment later, there was a pressure on her shoulder, and it occurred to her that he had put a hand there, very lightly. Please don't cry, he said. I'm sorry. If I go, will you come with me? Toadling stared up at him. She knew that her face was a mask of ink, but for a moment she was too surprised to care. Come with you? Where? Anywhere you like, he said. You've been here a long time. The world is different. It might be better. You could see for yourself. Leave? Leave here? For a moment, she wanted it so badly that she could taste it. No, no, I can't go. If I go, even if it gets him away, even if I can somehow keep the spell up from a distance, sooner or later there will be another prince, another knight, someone who reads that book. Someone will come, and if they get inside, she can get out. I can't, she whispered. Why not? He asked. There are so many things to see. If you don't trust me, and who can blame you? I will take you to my mother. She'll be a little surprised to have an elf about the house, but she is the kindest woman imaginable. I can't. She shook her head. Not won't. Can't. I would, but I can't leave. I'm sorry. Is there some magic that keeps you here? He asked. He patted her shoulder very carefully. Yes, she said, grateful for the out. That's the best way to explain it. Your offer is very kind. I wish I could take you up on it. Truly. But I can't. Helene nodded. In that case, he said, taking his hand over an odd little half bow. Then, Mistress Toadling, I will go, she sagged, partly with relief, partly with disappointment. The moment caught in her throat like pain. And I will return, said Helene, before too much longer, and find a way to free you from that magic. After he left, Toadling found herself at loose ends. She did not miss the strange night, exactly. To miss someone, or not miss them, seemed to require that there be some relationship beyond 2 brief meetings. She had more right to miss the wagtails that had once run across the grass around the tower. It was more as if time had divided itself in half around him, falling into 2 separate pieces, the time before she spoke to him and the time after. Normally, when she took on toad skin, she also took on toad thoughts and spent her days in contemplation of nothing more complicated than earthworms and millipedes moving under the leaves. Time would pass over her head, and she would hardly notice, unless some human activity required human thoughts. Now, however, she found herself thinking untoad-like thoughts. She would snap up a fat worm and think in the next instant about leaving, about hopping to the edge of the road and taking on human form, and simply walking away. Which was madness. Which she could not do. This is ridiculous, Toadling muttered to herself, taking human form again. And she was muttering out loud again, a habit that she thought she had shed long ago. This is absurd. The worms won't be different anywhere else. To me for a few moments. He stayed for 2 days. Why am I still thinking about this? Nevertheless, she was. She worried at the memory in her head. The words she had said, the ones she hadn't said, the ones that she should not have said at all. Half the world had died of the plague and made less impact on her than a few moments of conversation. After a week, was it a week? She had gotten out of the habit of marking time. It seemed like a long time, but only because she was thinking so much, she came to a decision. I should check, she said. I should make sure, in case something has happened. She did not even dare think to herself that the sleeper might be dead. The relief might kill her, that were true. For the first time in many years, Toadling entered the keep. In the beginning, she had visited the keep daily to reassure herself that the sleeper was still there. Then, slowly, the need to check had faded. She had gone back every few weeks, then once a year, then not at all. It was easier that way. The sleeper became restless if she visited too often. The Thornhedge, which was so inaccessible to a human, was far different when one was the size of a toad. The brambles became a series of highways, pounded down by the feet of mice and the long bodies of snakes. Toadling hopped through the thornhedge. The thorns were as large as roof timbers to a toad, and as easily avoided. She reached the stones of the keep itself and slipped easily through a drainage hole. The far end was plugged with wet leaves, but nothing she could not force her way through. The walls around the central courtyard were still standing. The thorns had pulled a few stones from the walls, but that was all. It was the south tower where the plants had concentrated, sending long whips up the walls and covering it in a riot of green. She stood up, out of toad shape, and walked the courtyard. Her fingers trailed over moss and lichen. Trees grew thickly inside the walls, a small, unlikely forest. The main hall had lost its roof long ago, and an oak tree had grown up inside it. Toadling had no interest in it, or in the squat north tower. If she walked there, she risked waking too many memories. She went to the base of the south tower and stood, looking up. The magic was concentrated near the top of the remains of the tower, but she could feel it from here. It was like stepping into a warm rain. Individual droplets of magic beaded invisibly against her skin, and she brushed them away with her hands. It was her own magic, but it had been separated from her for so long that it felt unfamiliar, like returning to a childhood nursery when one was grown. A skilled climber might have been able to get up the outside of the tower, but that was a long, difficult way. Instead, Toadling pulled herself up to one of the narrow windows, took toad shape again, and slipped inside. The interior was dark. She felt her way up the steps on human hands and knees. The magic was stronger here. Witness the fact that the steps had not fallen apart over the centuries, and she had to wipe it away from her face as she climbed. The drops became a stream, became a torrent, and then Toadling was swimming in the magic, surrounded by it. She came to the landing at the top of the tower. The doorway was open. The door had been torn off its hinges, and Toadling did not have the skill to replace it. The roof was gone, but the vines clustered so thickly overhead that they made a ceiling the color of knotted veins. Dried leaves crunched under her feet as she entered the bedroom. And there she was, curled up on the bed. Her golden hair fanned out around her. Her chest rose and fell, and she had a slight smile on her lips. Toadling stood over the maiden that she had enchanted, and let out a long, long sigh. Chapter 3. Toadling had been taken by the fairies less than an hour after she was born. There were many precautions in those days for keeping changelings at bay. Bits of cold iron tucked into the blankets, a lodestone hung above the cradle, 3 rowan twigs wrapped in red thread and tucked under the pillow. But Toadling's mother was bleeding heavily, and her ladies swarmed around her, and Toadling was set down in the cradle without any wards at all. By the time the bleeding had stopped, there was a changeling in the crib, and Toadling had been taken into fairy. It is true that sometimes the fairies steal human children for themselves, but Toadling was not one of them. The goal of the thieves was to leave a changeling in the crib, and what became of Toadling afterward was of no concern to them. There are a great many things that can happen to an infant in fairy, and most of them are bad. Toadling was, more or less, lucky. She was not harvested by the fleshsmiths, nor devoured by redcaps, nor raised in the retinue of a great lord of fairy. Instead, she was thrown to the green teeth, the slimy, swamp-dwelling spirits who devour unwary swimmers. Boy children they eat, always. Girl children they eat, mostly. But occasionally their numbers will fall, or one of them will be seized with some murky maternal instinct, and they will raise a child instead. The green teeth gave her the name Toadling. If she had swallowed a mouthful of mother's milk before the fairies took her, things might have been very different. That the first food she ate was a slurry of fish and pondweed, and by the magic of the green teeth, she did not die of it. Because she had eaten no human food, because she was barely born, Toadling's flesh was malleable to magic. The green teeth were able to teach her how to lie unmoving in the cold water, with only her eyes above the surface. She could not quite breathe water, but she could hold her breath for many minutes, and she would lie at the bottom of the stream, picking up shiny stones and tickling the bellies of passing fish. At night, or what passed for night in fairy, the green teeth slept in a tangle of fong, bony limbs, and waterweed hair. The oldest of them held Toadling, crazed her face just above the surface of the water, and she fell asleep with the sound of frogs croaking in her ears. When she was about 9 years old, as humans would judge it, she learned the trick of toad shape. One of the younger green teeth taught her, a swollen-bodied, spindly-limbed sprite called Duckwhite. Duckwhite was hideous, and her teeth were the color of moss, but she was as patient as water flowing over stone. They practiced for weeks, holding hands. They stood up, they squatted down, over and over, with Duckwhite's magic flowing over them both. At first, Toadling could not quite understand what was happening, and then she began to feel the magic, like water building up behind an earthen dam. It was a trickle, not a torrent, but it grew, and one day, without even realizing how it happened, the magic split into 2 streams, the dam broke, and Toadling dropped down into another shape entirely. Duckwhite clapped her webbed hands together and squalled with delight. The other green teeth swarmed around them, patting Toadling and praising her. She did the trick for them again and again, and the green teeth slapped their bony hands together and called her by the name that she would bear for the rest of her life. Surrounded by child-eating swamp spirits, Toadling felt intensely loved. She was 15 when the hair goddess came for her. The goddess had fur tipped with moonlight and eyes as deep as wells. She came running over the hills, stretching out her long legs, and stopped on the bank of the river. There were 3 of them in the water, the eldest, Duckwhite, and Toadling. The eldest swam to the edge of the bank and bowed deeply to the silver hair. Duckwhite took Toadling's hand and drew her to the bank, but the grasp of her webbed fingers was tight and frightened. "Goddess," said the eldest in the screaming language of the green teeth. The goddess dipped her head in acknowledgement. "Younger sister," she said, "I have need of your foundling." Duckwhite cried out in sudden grief and hid her face behind her hair. "She is one of us," said the eldest. It was not a denial of the goddess, only a statement. "In 100 years, no one will know that she was not born among the waters." "Then I have come in time," said the goddess. "I must take her now. I don't want to leave," said Toadling, realizing what was happening. She swallowed. The word foundling had reached down into her heart and made a sound that she did not like. "And I do not want to drag you away," said the great silver hair, turning her liquid eyes on Toadling. "But we are not always given the choices that we want." Duckwhite moaned and clasped Toadling to her. Her waterweed hair tangled around them both. The eldest waited for a few moments, then gently pulled Toadling away. Duckwhite sobbed black tears into her hands. The ancient green teeth was the oldest of her kind, but her teeth were sharp as razors. She bit Toadling's left palm, across the heel of her hand, and left a semicircle of tooth marks. "Remember us?" she said, picking up a handful of river mud and laying it over the wound. "Remember us, and if you can, find your way back to us in time." Toadling nodded. Tears were forming in the corners of her eyes and running over her skin, and the bite on her hand smarted under the healing mud. The silver hair took Toadling up on her back. There was no other word for it. Toadling was fairly certain that she had not climbed up on her own. But suddenly she was astride. The broad furry back in moonlight was pooling up against her skin. The hare nodded to the eldest, touched Duckwhite with her nose, and then turned and dashed away. It was not like riding a horse. Not that Toadling had ever seen a horse, but she had ridden the shining black kelpies that lurk on the riverbanks, and this was not at all like that. It was more like lying in a meadow that happened to be moving at extraordinary speed. The hare ran across the fields of fairy, with Toadling lying flat against her back, and things passed long and wordless between them. She would never be able to describe the ride. No one ever asked her, but she would have liked to have the words to fit around it, if only for herself. It was like a dream that went on for many hours, and in the morning the fragments still lay dusted across her shoulders. When they arrived at last at a tall tower, Toadling knew enough to slip down from the goddess's back. Her bare feet made no sound on the cobblestones. "Here," said the hare, her eyes glowing silver. "Here you stay, and learn what you can. Your father's house will have need of you in time." Toadling stared at her palm, at the scabbed line of tooth marks. "What do I care for my father's house?" she asked. It was a tiny rebellion, but it was the first one she had ever uttered. The hare flicked her ears. "Nothing," she said, "nor may you ever, nor do I. But I do not like suffering, and will stop it where I can, and for that you must help me. These people will teach you what you may need to know." She dashed away again. The earth should have rung like a bell under her footfalls, but somehow it did not. Toadling turned. She was in a courtyard. A man was approaching her, holding a lantern. He had a face like a catfish, and the hair that sprouted from his ears moved restlessly, like whiskers. "I see," he said. "I see. I am Master Garami, and we will begin your schooling here." Toadling's schooling could have gone a great deal better, and the only consolation, perhaps, is that it could have gone a great deal worse. It was a tiny backwater of the fairy court, but for Toadling it was overwhelming. She was not ignorant. She knew the true names of every plant that grew within 1,000 feet of the river, and how to coax them into growth. She knew how to address a grindylow if one swam up from the grim depths of the lake, and she knew the conflicted hearts of kelpies and how to soothe one when it ran mad. She could recite every song and story of the green teeth, braiding them together and unwinding them over the course of a night. She could start a balefire of fish bones and see a tiny piece of the future in the way the spine cracked apart. In the fairy court, these things were useless, and so she was considered stupid. She left the green teeth knowing everything worth knowing about her world, and came to the fairy court to find that she knew nothing at all. Toadling had never worn clothing. She had never gone into a tiny room to squat on a board to relieve herself. The taste of cooked food was strange on her tongue, and beds were strange, hard things compared to the embrace of water. The hardness of the bed was the least of it, however. Toadling had never slept alone. The green teeth piled together under the water, mostly in a heap. Sometimes, if one was restless, she would move a little way off, but never far enough that she could not hear the sounds of the other green teeth breathing underwater. The first night, in the strange room, Master Garami pointed to the bed and explained that people slept on them. It did not occur to him to explain about the blankets, but that did not matter, because Toadling did not mind the cold. And then he went out and shut the door behind him, and the first lesson that Toadling learned, in that strange place, was loneliness. It took her a year to learn to read, and she was never easy with it. The green teeth had a way of using their necklaces, each bead waking a memory, and that was a little like reading, so the concept was not completely foreign to her. Toadling dreamed sometimes of Duckwhite's webbed fingers stringing letters together one after another. Each word called up would summon a torrent of memories. So much of Toadling's trouble was in concentrating on the present. Every time she read stone, her mind wanted to pull up the round pebbles underneath the river, and the mossy overhangs of the banks, and the cold flagstones of the courtyard, and the gray stone with the hole in it that the eldest had dangled in front of her as an infant. She would be left sitting for many minutes, staring at the single word on the page while memories flowed over her, until her teacher snapped, "Stupid!" and made her read it over again. Master Garami was kind to her. Some of the others were not. The reading teacher was a small, shaggy, sharp-eared creature with slitted eyes that hissed and cursed her slowness. Nevertheless, she learned. It was in Toadling's nature to try to please. She learned about clothing and bedding, and words written down because the goddess had told her to, because her teachers felt it was important. She learned to speak in polite words instead of squalls, and to eat dead food without snatching. She memorized things about the human world that she would need to know, that a king was the ruler, and a lord was under him, and the lord's servants under that. Her understanding was spotty at best. Toadling thought for a long time that the king must be like the eldest, and pictured a massive, swollen human that gathered the lords up in his arms and held them while they slept. When she tried to explain this to Master Garami, he put his head down on the table, and the hairs in his ears rippled with laughter. She learned that her ideas of beauty were wrong, and of no use to anyone. In her world, the eldest was the most beautiful, swollen with power and secrets and the deaths of her enemies. Duckwhite was beautiful, with her patience and her quick, many-jointed fingers. Reedbones, who had enormously long, thin arms and who could swim side to side like an eel, swifter than a kelpie could run, was beautiful. Toadling, who was small and slow and could not breathe water, did not consider herself beautiful, but it hurt to learn that she was homely and her family were considered among the most hideous of fairy. She had been there for nearly a month before Master Garami told her what she was. He did it almost by accident. He was trying to teach her a small bit of magic, enough to light a candle, and she was failing wretchedly at it. "This should be easy," he said wearily, rubbing his face, "even for someone born human." "What?" she said. He blinked at her, and she at him, and then he said, half in a whisper, "Did the green teeth never tell you? Tell me what?" And he said the word changeling to her, and it too slipped down into her heart and rang like a bell under her ribcage. He was kind, and he did not mean to be cruel. He had no way to know that the word would pluck her away from the monsters who loved her. On the far side of Changeling, they did not belong to her, nor she to them. So he told her about the games fairies play with mortals, and the echoes that rang between the two kingdoms, and how she had been born in that other kingdom instead of this one. She felt every word taking her a little farther away from the green teeth, and bringing her no closer to the human she should have been. And it occurred to her at last to ask the question that she should have asked the hair goddess, "Who's my father?" Master Garami ran his hands over his long, restless whiskers. "A human king," he said. "Barely a king at all, in truth. He holds less land than a horse could cross from dawn to noon." She said, Toadling made a gesture toward the window, toward the moon and the sky and the world, and Master Garami nodded, "that my father's house would have need of me." "Yes," said her teacher. "I have been watching, and it seems likely." Toadling wrapped her arms around herself. She felt ill, and her skin felt dry. She was always dry in this place. She did not care about her father, or a mortal kingdom. She wanted running water, and deep river hollows dappled with leaves. "It has been 5 days, in the mortal world, since you were taken." He smiled faintly. "And so I have another few years to teach you what I can. And then I will send you back to the mortal world, so that you may arrive on the 7th day, to stand as godmother to the child left in your place."